everybody. Happy Friday. Of course, one more game to go for Norwich City in the regular season. 45 games out of the way with. The trip to St Andrews tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Big game for both sides. Of course, Birmingham fighting for their lives at the bottom. They have to win the game to have any chance of staying up. Norwich, of course, with the incentive to secure the playoffs mathematically, it's almost there. It's within touching distance. Take a pretty miraculous events, I suppose, to happen for them not to be at least in the top six, but the carrot of fifth place is, of course, there. With that, delighted to be joined by Sam, of course, my colleague for your preview show. We want your comments, questions, score predictions, whatever it might be. Get them down in the comment section below, and of course, we'll come around to those in a little while. Sam, I think the place to start is probably the season. Well, generally, I mean, we're 45 games in now, one more game to go. I know it's kind of difficult. David Wagner didn't want to reflect too heavily on the season until maybe the final whistle's gone tomorrow, and we know mathematically that Norwich will be in the playoffs. But looking at it as a whole and kind of everything that's unfolded, what have you made of this season?
Yeah, it's been an absolutely bizarre season, hasn't it? I think the range of emotions has been all over the place, and there is, as you said, still a hesitancy to diagnose it as anything really until, first of all, playoffs are confirmed, and then we will see how well Norwich get on in them. But I think if you had told me after that Blackburn defeat in November that Norwich wouldn't lose another game at home for the rest of the regular season, I would have been absolutely shocked. So the achievement since then has been fantastic. The way that the team have turned it around, they deserve unbelievable credit, and I think everyone knows the key individuals behind that and how good certain players have been in getting Norwich back into that playoff picture. Obviously, there was that very miserable bit before that, and I think that's played quite a big part in why the season feels so up and down, is because that was actually the lowest point Norwich have been in for a really long while. When you think how much they've been either in the Premier League or in the race for promotion, for a second season to have been looking like they were going to finish mid-table, I think it was long term one of the most worrying times to be associated with Norwich City. So to go from that low to a position now where we're looking forward to hopefully watching some playoff football and maybe even seeing Norwich at Wembley, it's an unbelievable turnaround. I think the squad is one of the stranger squads that Norwich have had recently. They've got that strange blend of really experienced players who people and fans would have known for a really long time, as well as these sort of abstract finds like Borja Sainz that nobody knew about. And overall, it's just a really strange situation for the club to be in and to try and assess. But in terms of where they are now, it's the sort of position that every football fan loves being in. And if you can't get up for the playoffs, hopefully, and your team being that close to promotion, then you probably need to quit watching this sport, because it's about to get really exciting, and probably all of our estimations will be evaluated at the end of the season. As you said, Wagner doesn't want to talk about it yet, and although we can do that a little bit more and we can talk in more hypotheticals, a lot relies on the next few weeks, and I personally am quite excited for it.
Yeah, amid all the positivity, a slight negative, I suppose, yesterday from the press conference. Ashley Barnes ruled out of the two semi-finals, might be available if Norwich do make it to Wembley. Given kind of the impact, I suppose, he's had on this Norwich side this season at different points, particularly that relationship to Josh Sargent, which we've mentioned on multiple occasions. Really, those two have really struck up a good balance, and they've kind of been crucial, I suppose, that sort of in terms of this upturn in form, particularly in the second half of the season. It's coincided with them both being available. How big a blow do you think that is, Sam, for Norwich? We've had this debate about how we get Johnny Rowe back in. Maybe it gives David Wagner that option, but then, you look at kind of the striking options more generally, given that Højlund hasn't really been given those opportunities, it maybe feels like a much bigger blow than it could have been.
Yeah, I know there are still a lot of fans that haven't been won over by Ashley Barnes, and I can completely understand that. I think everyone that maybe is slightly more modern in the way that they like watching football, that likes a more possession-based style, that didn't believe in the value of experience maybe as much as David Wagner did, had concerns when he came in the summer. And for those people, those concerns will continue, because Ashley Barnes isn't going to all of a sudden get 10 years younger. He's not going to become a completely different, very technical player that he isn't. So I think he's still got fans to win over, but tactically you can't deny the importance of what he brings to that side. As you said, he sort of unlocks the best out of Josh Sargent. And although Gabriel Sara is the man who you're more likely to see playing fantastic through balls to him and setting him up for goals, Barnes is almost the person that facilitates the room in behind that he can go and exploit, and gives him a little bit more time to get on the ball and to get involved in the game. And that would be where my concern is, as well as obviously the amount of experience and nous that he brings to the pitch. And we all know about those elements because they've been talked about almost non-stop in relation to Ashley Barnes. I suppose to put a positive spin on it, and you sort of mentioned it there, it does maybe make David Wagner's decisions a little bit easier, and where he probably wanted to fit 5 or 6 players into 4 or 5 positions, he now has one of those taken out. And for me, it's as simple as slotting Jonathan Rowe in. And I know he hasn't looked, I mean, I don't know if we're going to come on and talk about this more, but I spoke about it a little bit on Tactics Board. I know he hasn't looked up to his best in recent weeks. He hasn't looked like he's got quite as much fitness as he could. But in this scenario where they go into the last game of the season and all they need to do is avoid an 8-goal swing against a team that's in relegation trouble, this surely is the best opportunity to give him 60 minutes to then go and get match fit for the huge games that the playoff semi-finals will provide. So in that sense, it makes bedding him back in a little bit easier, and that will be the positive that you can take from it. But as you said, Wagner simply doesn't trust Sidney van Hooijdonk to play the same role that Ashley Barnes does. I would be incredibly shocked if he gets to start between now and the end of his time at the football club. So what it does do is take an option out of that front two, and it means that there's probably going to have to be a reshuffle and a midfielder pushed into an advanced position, namely probably Gabriel Sara. So yeah, I'm interested to see how that works. I think in terms of actual technical contributions, it could mean technically that Norwich's best attacking team is on the pitch, but in terms of how specifically Barnes fits Wagner's system and how important he has been for that in the last few months, it is obviously quite a significant blow.
Yeah, of course. Christian Fashnak got the nod last week to get the start, his first start since the away game at Borough in sort of early March time. What did you make of maybe his performance levels last week? And I suppose we've mentioned Jonathan Rowe and sort of maybe that lack of fitness that we've kind of seen. I feel it in recent games. He's not looked sort of the sharp Jonathan Rowe that we had at the start of the campaign. Which way do you think David Wagner might swing tomorrow? I know anyone that's maybe seen your tactics board might know which way you're going to go, but which one of those two would you sort of see as featuring in the starting 11 tomorrow?
Yeah, it's a good question. I thought Fastnacht really struggled against Swansea. He hasn't really looked the same player from the start as he has off the bench this season. Maybe in those first few games, because there was, I think, maybe about a month or so when Norwich were really, really good at the start and they looked like they might even compete for automatics. He was a really key player in that, and he was really, really exciting. But since then, I'm not sure he's had many starts at all where he's actually looked impressive. In fact, his best games have been coming off the bench against Hull and Cardiff, and I'm sure there are others that are escaping my mind at this point. So I don't see, based on the evidence, how Wagner could go into the playoffs believing that Fastnacht is somebody who's the best one to play that role, but we know how much he trusts him, and he does definitely go for players he trusts. You look at the likes of, Shane Duffy, Kenny McLean, Fastnacht is an example, Ashley Barnes as well, to be fair, this season, that when he decides a player is perfect for his team and suits his setup, it's very rare that he goes away from that. But you look at Jonathan Rowe's record this season and you just wonder how any manager could deny him a place in the starting 11 when you've got these big games coming up. And we know how big a feature of Norwich's season individual moments have been. And Jonathan Rowe has been almost the main example of that. Even Gabriel Sara, who has had those amazing moments, has been contributing throughout the game in possession and making smaller contributions. Jonathan Rowe this season has been all about fantastic goals, getting the ball in his own half and dribbling to the edge of the opposition box. Fantastic little interactions that last 10 seconds. So in the playoffs, where those moments are so prevalent and can be so important, if you're a manager and you have someone who's so capable of producing those, I don't see how you could deny them a place in your starting 11. So that's why on Tactics Board I said I thought Rowe would start, because we know how important match fitness is to David Wagner. He really likes to build people up in sort of his own programme and then get them in. And if you want them to be match fit, I mean, this is the perfect opportunity. So if it was me, it would be Rowe. But again, Wagner loves those players who he can trust tactically and who will put a shift in, and he knows Fastnet is one of those. So it is a little bit of a toss-up, but if it was up to me, I'd go for Rowe, and for that reason, I'll just be positive and say that it will be him in the starting 11 tomorrow.
Keeping on the theme of fitness, Dimitris Giannoulis looks like he's going to be involved in the matchday squad tomorrow. So how do you rate Sam McCallum's performances, I suppose, since Giannoulis' absence? You know, we've kind of had that debate throughout the season, which one should start games. They feel like they've sort of been on a level par at different points. Giannoulis has then maybe edged out McCallum sort of as this sort of positive run started, but obviously McCallum's been forced into playing week in, week out. Where do you sort of put his performance levels, and can you see Giannoulis, I suppose, pushing in for those potential playoff semi-finals?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, really, because I think Norwich are in the unfortunate situation of having both of those thrive on different types of motivation. I think McCallum actually has worked best when he's got that competition. I think actually when Giannoulis was competing with him and he was having to scrap for these 45 minutes of football and one start every 6 weeks, those were the opportunities where you could tell he was really keen to make the most, and he was actually really impressive. I remember the second half against Ipswich at Portman Road when he was just chucked in because Giannoulis had a minor injury, and he was really, really impressive. Came off the bench against, I think, was it Huddersfield that he came on and scored that header almost straight away. Again, another impressive performance where you felt he was playing for game time. And then, I mean, I've seen some people saying that they've been impressed by by McCallum's performances since Giannoulis has been out injured. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel actually he's not been on the same level as he was when he was competing with Giannoulis. I think he's still been reliable, but every time I was watching him before, I was going, wow, I can't believe he's not in the starting 11. And now I think he's been a decent Championship fullback, but he hasn't pushed those claims any further for me. So given what we were talking about earlier and what I was saying about Wagner and the players that he trusts and wanting that consistency in his starting 11, Giannoulis would also fit into that bracket for me. So I think it's going to be a balance of managing his fitness and trying to get him into the 11, because I don't think he will chuck him in for this game based on however long he's been out injured. But if Norwich are winning the game with half an hour left, could I see Giannoulis coming on and getting a few more minutes to try and maybe build him up for a start in the second leg of the semi-final or the playoff final if Norwich get there? That's probably a scenario I could see. But given how he's done it and the fact that McCallum has proved pretty reliable, I'd be surprised if Giannoulis goes and starts it. But either way, I think Norwich are in a fairly good position left-back wise now going into the playoffs, because although they will be playing sides who obviously have better records than them across the season, I think as far as squad depth in the Championship, left-back is a pretty good position for them.
Yeah, lots has been sort of spoken around, I suppose, by fans this week about how David Wagner approaches this game. Does he drop some of his key players with sort of the view of the playoffs in mind? It's then going to be a long old time before they then play again, which I know is something you sort of discussed with fans on the recent Fans podcast. Wagner was asked that question yesterday. Just going to play the clip now, and then we'll talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, as I said, because we like to win football matches, we like to win, we like to end up as high as we can, and we are not mathematically safe. We go strong. We will attack this game because we know if we win, we can finish fifth.
Yeah, kind of got the impression there there's going to be a strong starting 11. Fifth, obviously, is the kind of the place that Norwich are playing for. With all that context, you know, what motivation do these Norwich players need tomorrow? It's going to be kind of a difficult one, because I suppose their eyes potentially might be glued elsewhere and what's going to happen further along, down the line. So how do they approach this game? And then maybe sort of with that dynamic of fifth and sixth, does it really matter where they finish, I suppose, come the final whistle tomorrow?
Probably until Ipswich went and did as well as they have in the last few weeks and things started to fall into their favour, I would have said it doesn't matter, because I think Ipswich and Southampton, it's difficult to pick one of those really. But since it's looked like Leeds are going to finish third and that whoever finishes sixth will be playing them in the semi-final, I've sort of turned to this position where I feel that finishing fifth would actually be quite advantageous for Norwich. And yes, either way, they'll be underdogs and they'll have a very difficult tie in terms of Southampton or Leeds. But I think if I had to choose one of those two, I would choose Southampton. And that's why I think it's important for Norwich to finish fifth. And really, there is a decent amount of motivation. I know those Norwich players will be privately have probably a mix between them of whether some of them are a little bit anxious about getting the job over the line, and some of them will be very relaxed about the fact that it's pretty much already done. But that fifth position gives you a lot more motivation, and I think it's a statistical and numerical, tangible sign of how much they've improved. And I feel that fifth feels a lot better than sixth. Wagner's Huddersfield, I think, got promoted actually from fifth, and sixth tends to be the position where somebody's snuck in. And I don't think Norwich want to be occupying that role. And although I think it suits them perfectly to be underdogs, which they will be, finishing there and having that tangible momentum, I think would serve them fairly well in the playoffs. So I think they'll be very keen to get that. I think the final day situation does add another element to it. I don't think we'd even be talking about it in the same sort of uneasy way that we are if that wasn't the case. If it was in the middle of the season, Norwich were fifth in the league and they were playing 22nd place Birmingham, I think we'd all be fairly relaxed about it. Everyone would be predicting 3 or 4-0 wins for Norwich, and it would be a fairly easy task to finish above West Brom and get Southampton in those playoffs. But because of how motivated Birmingham were going to be, because of that strange flux that Norwich are in with the different motivations and the way that it could play out on the final day, I think we are adding another element to it. And if Norwich can separate that element, which to be fair, they've actually been really good at doing, you look at the East Anglian derbies where Ipswich were quite clearly phased by the occasion in some way. Norwich just treated it like another game, and they set up tactically really, really well. Took 4 points against a team that looks like it's going up to the Premier League. So if they can do that again tomorrow, I think they'll finish fifth fairly comfortably. But of course, there are several factors to take into consideration, and it's not quite as simple as that.
Yeah, time to talk a little bit about the opposition. Of course, Birmingham, 22nd in the Championship at the moment. They're 1 point adrift of Plymouth, who, of course, have got the current survival position. Plymouth, as you sort of mapped out, they're at home to Hull tomorrow. Hull, of course, got the option to try and push into the playoffs. So these sort of two games feel like they're intertwined perfectly. Two sides that are playing sides that are sort of in the hunt for playoffs. What have you made of Birmingham this season? It's been kind of I suppose a bit of a turbulent season for them. Management changes at different points. They've had new ownership relatively recently. I know sort of in terms of their playing squad, they've got sort of a lot of players on loan, lots of players that have come in January, maybe had an impact. Gary Rowett currently there, of course, in charge, but sold out at St Andrews tomorrow, and I think their home form's been relatively decent this season. It's been that away form that's been of more concern. I think, you look at their sort of last couple of results, draws away at Rotherham and Huddersfield, win one of those games, and it's sort of in their hands, I suppose, going into the final day. So what sort of test are you expecting tomorrow, and, what have you made of their season, Sam?
Yeah, I think if I was a Birmingham fan, I would be absolutely livid, because the way that the ownership have sort of dealt with that situation, and those making the football decisions have dealt with that situation, has been an absolute disaster. I mean, you look at how they were earlier this season, even how they were going into their visit to Carrow Road, which I think was John Eustace's last game in charge of the club. They were going into it and it felt like it was actually a pretty difficult test from a Norwich perspective. And we were talking about the good form. I think they were in the playoff positions, and I'm not saying they would have gone on and qualified for the playoffs, but all they needed to do was keep up that form for another couple of months, and they probably would have been well clear of relegation, and they wouldn't have feared any sort of trouble in that sense at any point. But they make a terrible managerial change. They then pick Wayne Rooney, who wasn't the right man for the project at that time. Then, to be fair to them, it's a little bit of bad luck with the Tony Mowbray situation and how that's panned out. But overall, just to see their slide from where they were earlier on in the season to now, I mean, yes, it's been an absolute catastrophe for them. And that's probably why they're so desperate to avoid it, because the regret will be absolutely off the scale if they go and get relegated now. It will be a season where they'll just be able to pinpoint 15 different times where they could have stopped this happening and they weren't able to. So I think all of that and the terrible decisions that have been made probably tell you that they've got a group of players that are better than where they are in the league. I think they've got some fairly decent ones that could provide Norwich some problems. Obviously, Jay Stansfield isn't in the same sort of form that he was earlier on in the season, but is somebody who actually lit the Championship alight at the start of it. So it's not one where Norwich can completely relax. Of course, they will have that motivation. And I spoke to former Birmingham manager and Norwich assistant manager Lee Clark earlier on in the week, and he spoke about the fact that when he was at the club, he felt that relegation trouble gave his players a bit of a lift, and it took them to another level because they were so desperate to avoid going down to League One. And yeah, it will be the same sort of pressure on them when they face Norwich. So as I was saying, while if it was different circumstances, we'd be back in Norwich to the hilt, and it would feel like a fairly comfortable game. There are so many factors that will make it more complicated than that. So yeah, I think Birmingham are a decent side, not maybe an amazing side, but definitely not one that should be in the position that they are. And yeah, as I said, if I was a fan of theirs, I would be absolutely livid.
Yeah. Do you subscribe to the view that tomorrow's potentially a sort of dress rehearsal, I suppose, for semi-final games? Is there going to be a high pressure, high intensity game? Two sides that require a result for various matters. I mean, David Wagner sort of mapped it out that tactically, obviously, it's going to be a very different game to that, maybe against Southampton or Leeds. But in terms of the atmosphere and dealing with that, coping with that pressure, is that sort of an ideal game for Norwich? Sort of final day of the season.
I think it is a little bit, but equally, there are almost you can apply various aspects of any match to any other aspect. And although he'll be looking at that and he'll be trying to motivate his players by using all of those devices, and he'll be using that to try and get that experience in his players. I'm not sure there are really enough to be making a strong comparison between the two. We look at the two previous games for Norwich. They were at home at Carrow Road, where the first leg of the playoffs is going to be played if they qualify. They were against teams where, and you made this point on the podcast, where the setup and the tactical things that they were trying to achieve were very similar to the sides that they'll face in the playoffs if they get there. So there is definitely a pressure element that sort of goes into the playoffs and will be similar to the playoffs. But equally, whenever you're playing football in front of 27,000 people, or well, actually that applies to Carrow Road. I'm not sure what the St Andrews capacity is, but whenever you're playing football in front of thousands and thousands of people, there is pressure. So yeah, I can understand Wagner trying to use that as motivation and trying to see it in that way. But as he said, I think there are huge differences between Birmingham and the sides that they'll face, and maybe it isn't as much of a playoff rehearsal as maybe some people will say it could be. But this group is one that's proven itself capable of delivering on the big occasions. They've beaten the teams around them. They've won the games where there have been lots of eyes on them. But so yeah, I think you back them to deliver against Birmingham, but I don't think they'll learn anything especially new from this one. It's not going to be more pressure on them than it has been, say, against Ipswich or against Coventry in that playoff crunch clash where it felt like they needed to win, or against, I don't know, Cardiff earlier in the season where it felt like David Wagner's job was on the line. So yeah, I think it's a sort of pressure they've faced before, and there is that element going into the playoffs. But for me, there are more differences than similarities with what there will be in the semi-finals.
Yeah, we'll be live for another sort of 5 or 10 minutes. So any comments, questions, score predictions, get them down below. We'll dip into a few of those now. Joe feeling that Norwich will be on the front foot straight away tomorrow. Gabriel Zara could be the key player, I suppose, to help them dominate. Carl is a Millwall fan, but he's hoping that we beat Birmingham tomorrow and send Birmingham and row it down. So interesting. David on YouTube saying Birmingham to beat Norwich and survive. Norwich in the playoffs. Quarter of a chance, truly wide open. Yes, Peter, the game is on Sky Sports. Of course, a really huge game. Ollie asking us, can Norwich win the playoffs? I mean, Sam, we've kind of mapped out maybe, sort of the potential play or teams they might have to face in the semi-finals. Can you see them, I suppose, navigating those two games and then getting to that final where I feel personally that Norwich in a one-game shootout probably actually gives them a better opportunity than maybe it does if they have in this sort of semi-finals where they have to try and get through two legs?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the semi-final is more of an obstacle to the Premier League than the final actually is. But I think I said this on the podcast, or I've said it somewhere else, that unfortunately I do foresee a semi-final defeat, and that's not to talk down the job that they've done to get there. I just think, Southampton, or I think it will be Southampton, but both Southampton and Leeds have unbelievable squads that probably should never have ended up in the Championship in the first place. And over 180 minutes and probably more. I'm not sure Norwich will quite have the quality to win that game. I mean, they definitely can. I think the question was, can they? And they definitely can. I wouldn't rule them out at all, but just very marginally, I think they might lose the semi-final, unfortunately. But I'll be absolutely elated to be proven wrong.
Yeah, of course, we'll have lots more discussions around that, hopefully, in the next week or so when we're sort of building up to semi-final games. Dylan saying can't see Birmingham winning. Heard that Birmingham showed zero fight in their previous games. That will change. I think at home they've been a lot more, a different test than they have been away from home. I think they're second bottom in the table in terms of away form, but their home form, I think they're about 11th. And obviously that really good win against Coventry a couple of weeks back at home, 3-0. They obviously showed that they can do it against these sides, and it obviously is going to be, they've got to try and harness that, I suppose, from a Birmingham perspective, if they're going to have any chance of beating Norwich tomorrow. Sam, I think it's probably got to that point in the show where I'm going to ask you for probably the most tough question you're going to get from this whole show. Score prediction time. How are you feeling? Will Norwich get the job over the line? And, I suppose maybe a position. Will they finish fifth? Will they finish sixth?
Yeah, I feel quite bad here because it seems that there are a few Birmingham fans watching, and honestly, I have nothing against Birmingham. One of the shorter trips we do in the whole season, and I'd quite like to see them stay up. But I do think Norwich are good enough in these big game scenarios to eliminate all of the other factors going into it, to eliminate a lot of the pressure that will be on them and all the eyes that will be on the game. And unfortunately for Birmingham, but maybe fortunately for Norwich City's playoff hopes, I think they will win this game 2-1, and that would mean finishing fifth. So that's what I'm gonna go for. Again, I have to apologise to Blues fans, but I think Norwich will just about get the job done. What about you? Do you reckon Norwich will get there and finish fifth?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting game. I suppose depends on maybe who scores the first goal. I think could be key. Under Rowett and Birmingham, if they've got the 1-0 lead, you could imagine they're going to try and sort of hold on to that, because that might be enough to keep them up. And I think then it becomes a slightly more difficult game for Norwich. But if they go 1-0 up, I think then it could potentially change the whole sort of dynamic of it. I think I went for a 2-2 draw. In one show I've done this week, somewhere on our channel, maybe Terrace Talk, I can't remember now going back, but I think it's going to be a draw, which I don't think will be enough to keep Birmingham up. Obviously, they'd need a huge goal swing in the Plymouth game, and for Norwich, that would obviously complete the job. Whether that would be enough for fifth or sixth would obviously depend on West Brom's result then. But yeah, high scoring, entertaining 2-2 draw on the final day. I think Norwich have only lost one of their last 18 games against Birmingham, so they're sort of a little bit of a bogey team for the Blues. So whether that's something that their fans will be aware of, I'm not too sure. There's a few more late comments coming.
You've got to give us a prediction, fifth or sixth. You're sitting on the fence on that one.
I'll go fifth. I think Preston will beat West Brom, and then that point will be enough. David saying full house at St Andrews. Blues will win tomorrow and survive. Masters of relegation battles. They do have a good history, Birmingham, of getting themselves out of that. Peter going for a 2-1 Norwich City win. Dan Mayhew, enjoy Birmingham. It's where he was born. Even though he's a Norwich fan, he's going for a 1-1 draw. David saying, what team are Norwich playing? Will he rest? We kind of got the impression yesterday off the back of the press conference there's going to be a pretty strong Norwich 11, which maybe doesn't play into any hopes there for Birmingham. Joe saying the thing is Norwich have already beat Birmingham this season. Dylan, just think their Masters of Relegation battles reign has come to an end at some point, and then we go there. We will see, of course. We'll be at St Andrews tomorrow afternoon. You can keep it locked across our channels for live coverage. It'll be Sam on the live blog, so you can go and join him over there. We've got the Pinker Plus app, $2.99 a month. You can take out a free trial if you don't like it. Obviously, you can leave, but we'd rather you stay on the journey with us, which we feel like it's good value for money, and it particularly with these playoff games that are looking like they're going to be on the horizon. There's no better time to come and join us on that journey. Lots of good content across our channels more generally. You've got the Ewan Roberts latest column. Connor's just done a piece with Paul Lambert, which has got some very interesting quotes, I suppose, around his time at Norwich City, which is maybe well worth a read. And then if you go into YouTube as well, we've got lots of good stuff on there at the moment. You've got Terrace Talk, you've got Tactics Board, you've got an interview with Mike Phelan, of course, an ex-Norwich City Hall of Famer. He's a bit of a legend down here in terms of his playing career. Obviously, he had a couple of coaching stints down here. Connor had a good little chat with him for sort of 20 minutes, which you can watch in full. David Wagner's press conference is, of course, up as well. And we've got the fans podcast where, Sam and Connor spoke to various fans. So there's plenty of content to enjoy on this Friday afternoon. If you have, after you've finished watching us, Dan Mayhew, maybe Sidney Van Hooijdonk will score the winner. Sam, will he score a goal before he departs Norwich?
No, Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's probably feeling a little bit unlikely. Maybe we'll see him get some minutes tomorrow if Norwich are winning the game, or maybe trying to chase the game if they need a goal. Fingers crossed, maybe he could provide that big moment. It would be all written in the stars, I suppose, if he comes on at Wembley and scores the
That
winner.
would be amazing. I would love that.
There we go. Fingers crossed. With that, we're going to sign off this lunchtime. Thanks for joining us. Of course, if you're heading to St Andrews, I know it's a sold out home end and an away end, so it should be a good atmosphere. So bring the noise, and hopefully, of course, Norwich will get the job over the line. So enjoy your weekend, enjoy the rest of your Friday, and hopefully the sun will come out as well, because it's a little bit miserable